Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Since the election, the left corner of the white media has been in a bit of a nosedive. CNN's lost 26% of its viewers since the election. I guess being the American affiliate of Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party wasn't the ratings winner they thought it would be. And truth be told, at this point, CNN really doesn't need any more bad news, but that's what they're getting. Though as bad as the news is for CNN, it's even worse for the main hub of DNC propaganda, that is MSNBC, because their ratings after the election have crashed. They've lost over 50% of their audience. Yes, over half the people who were watching MSNBC have quit watching MSNBC. This is the end result of letting shills and the incompetent operative class define your network. Joe Scarborough was busy selling the soap, and Rachel Maddow's been making a moderate fool of herself with the usual Fourth Reich is just around the corner rhetoric. But all of that fear-mongering and scaremongering that they were doing, it was actually a big-stakes political gamble that they were taking. They were betting the farm that if they just scared enough people, hopefully the Orange Man wouldn't make it back to the White House, because they know that in a large part there's going to be hell to pay, because these were the very people who were doing the most to justify the lawfare and avalanche of lawsuits and prosecutions that came against Trump after he left office. But I was telling you, the biggest problem with what they were doing was when people saw all of these suits being brought against Trump and seeing an American president being dragged into court relentlessly, this is something that's never happened in the history of the Republic. It was so shocking, so jarring, a number of people looked and said, he can't be that bad. But around the sound stages of MSNBC, as far as they were concerned, don't worry, if people don't believe it, they will after we get these first couple of convictions, these first few lawsuits successful. Then they'll look at him and they'll see a scumbag. Well, the truth of the matter is that's not what they saw at all, and it's kind of hard to pay attention to Donald Trump's legal problems when you don't know how the hell you're going to pay for gasoline or groceries this week. Now, of course, that means absolutely nothing to the good folks who work over at MSNBC or CNN. These people are getting paid millions of dollars. Rachel Maddow is the highest paid person at the network. So as far as they're concerned, they don't know about anybody else, but hey, they can afford to pay their gas. They can go ahead and pay for their food. They have no problem paying their rent, or rather mortgages on their town homes and their penthouse suites and such. So as far as they're concerned, yeah, we know that there's some carping going on out there from these people, but that's only a small number. The economy's doing great, yeah, for the investor class and for a small number of people who make more than $250,000 a year. Those people are doing okay, but they're a small, tiny sliver of the electorate. But that's the problem, though, when you decide that you're going to create an echo chamber for yourself. Nancy Pelosi said that elections have consequences, and she was right. Democrats have certainly suffered the consequences with this election. You deny reality, you choose to listen to the nigga Jim Clyburns, America's favorite sharecropper, and this is what you get. Oh, and on a side note, remember how 4 years ago he was whining that his hand-picked puppet, Jaime Harrison, had lost a Senate race that he was damned to lose from the very beginning anyway, but Clyburn had put his own ragged credibility on the line by personally backing this guy. So when it became undeniable that Harrison was going to lose, Clyburn decided to start lying and scapegoating the BLM activist and claiming calls to defund the police were the real reason that Harrison lost. Now, those same activists were active heavy in Atlanta, and that's the only reason that Raphael Warnock and that Jewish guy won their Senate races in Georgia 4 years ago. So people saying defund the police didn't hurt anyone's campaign. In fact, it helped them. And if you did lose your political race, it's because you didn't have a prayer of winning in the first place. It was those young people who turned out in numbers 4 years ago and put the Democrats in power. But look at who Clyburn blamed, the very voters that they've been failing to serve for decades. Clyburn and his worthless brats are doing great financially, but his constituency is dirt poor, just like Richie Torres up in New York. Richie Torres has the poorest constituency in America. Sadly, though, Clyburn's constituents, who are mostly black baby boomers, they don't seem to have figured this out. That's the problem with having all these old people who are voting. They're not doing it because it serves any sort of interest. They're doing it mostly because it's their habit. And when the only issue that somebody has is their Social Security check coming on time, they won't be a problem for white power. But Jaime Harrison needs to be said. He was the head of the DNC until he announced now that he's going to be stepping down. But Jaime Harrison was the DNC chairman. That's right, he was the head of the DNC. Right after Trump won, Harrison announced, though, that he was stepping down as DNC chairman. This was the guy who was running the Democratic Party, and we see that he not only lost his own Senate race 4 years ago, but now he oversaw the wholesale implosion of his own party. This is the guy who Jim Clyburn vouched for. This is the guy who Clyburn claimed was going to be the future of the party, but apparently neither he nor the Democrats have a future. When you lose a presidential race to a twice-impeached, one-time insurrectionist, convicted felon who's been demonized 5 ways from Sunday for several years now, when you let that guy beat you, you are so dumb you'd fail a taste test. But this is the guy Jim Clyburn was griping about to those young voters, because he needed a scapegoat. But the fact that he was attacking the very young voters who Democrats need as the core of the party, that shows that these people are certified stupid. But they're not alone. We see the same suicidal arrogance from the left wing of the white media. Every time they lose an election, they always start saying that the party's drifted too far to the left. It's those radicals, especially the ones online. It's those far leftists out there who are to blame. Republicans never do that. They cater to their base. There's no irrational rhetoric that comes from their truly unhinged core audience that would ever be enough for them to say, oh, we've gone too far to the right. They don't do that. They never run from their base. They run to their base. Democrats, on the other hand, are constantly trying to appeal to the same donors and the same voters as the GOP, and that's why they keep losing. Why should people vote for Diet Republican when they can just as easily get the real thing? And those consequences that Nancy Pelosi talked about aren't just for political parties, they're also for these white media outlets too. As The Wrap reported, directly after the 2016 election, ratings for MSNBC fell. The network then went on to have its 4 most watched years in its history from 2017 to 2020. Now that's The Wrap trying to put a silver lining on this one. But the truth of the matter happens to be, at least in 2016, those media outlets had the advantage of being able to say, well, hell, who could have thought that a former game show host and professional carnival barker could actually become president? Who could have seen this one coming? They had that shock value, but they didn't have the controversy of the 2020 election outcome, and they also didn't have the fact that you had an unelectable candidate like Kamala Harris running this time either. They don't have those advantages this time around. They don't have the fluke, the novelty of, oh my God, I can't believe the orange man won. They were sitting here saying things that they knew not to be true. After 2016, why would they be repeating the exact same language? This was not a matter of, this is what the analysts tell us, this is what the information tells us, when in reality it was just a matter of confirmation bias. And while it is true that MSNBC did go on to have 4 of its most watched years during the Trump administration, the reality is this is not the first Trump administration. Circumstances differ greatly between this election and the one from 8 years ago. But these networks, they're going to be dancing on pins for a while. They're trying to stay fluid, to use one of their favorite terms. When Obama became president, these white media networks began hiring and giving shows to make work jobs to their Negro whisperers. Black folks who were on air because their only purpose being on there was to tell white viewers what black people were allegedly thinking. Of course, these Negro whisperers were dead wrong, but for these audiences, it was just interesting enough to keep them from changing the channel, though barely. However, after Obama left office and Hillary lost her bid for the presidency in 2016, these white left networks began firing all those Negro whisperers that they had put on the payroll. It was the purge around those networks. Melissa Harris Lacewell, Round the World in 80 Days, Von Bismarck Perry got the heave-ho, and she wasn't alone in the unemployment line, and even the ones who thought they survived the axe eventually got their walking papers regardless. Don Lemonade thought that identifying as LGBT would insulate him from being fired, but it didn't. He could identify however he liked, but the reality is that white network much preferred a white gay man like Anderson Cooper over a black person of any sexual orientation. I, for one, will be watching to see what happens with Simone Sanders. She only got hired because she had been part of the Biden administration and Biden was in office. She had the advantage also with the fact that she had actually lost her job at the White House. Resigned before she had even been there a whole year. She was gone in less than 12 months. So that's the reason why MSNBC gave her a job, and they gave him Jim Psaki a job too. They gave her a show. But if they got a choice between Simone Sanders and Psaki now, who do you think they're going to go with? Not the former Bernie Sanders campaign staffer. And it's not just white Democrats who the Simone Sanders and Joy Reids have to be on the lookout for. The alleged left-leaning white media has also been putting out its feelers to find some right-of-center talent to put on air. Expect to see a lot more people who are formerly with the Trump administration or otherwise in the orbit of MAGA world finding their way onto these white cable media outlets. These networks play the game. They have to deal with the Trump administration, especially his new FCC head, and that being the case, they're going to have to do something different. These networks pander to the same audience as the Democratic Party, big donors. CNN and MSNBC cater to advertisers, i.e. big business, just like the Democrats do. And speaking of people who pander, Roly-Poly's been looking for a job, a consulting gig, but at the moment he's probably thinking that he got pushed out of CNN too late instead of too early. And Van Jones is probably crying again, so don't be surprised when the few sorry Negroes you see start getting their little sideshows cut. The white media will do it quietly, but they're going to do it. It will be a toss-up between whether Simone Mammy Sanders gets fired or Jonathan putting on his Capehart. My money's on Capehart getting the boot first. All of these white media geniuses, all of their so-called experts that they got on, including these freelance idiots and the chumps on the sidelines desperately hoping to get their old jobs back like Roly-Poly, all these people who are the smartest people in the room who the white media keeps putting on the air and who keep getting it wrong. And just for the record, when you look at the stellar political advice that Roly-Poly has offered to the Democrats over the years, how much you want to bet Roly's been given the same stale sales pitch to these white media networks in the desperate hopes that one of them will give him a weekend show, or at the very least make him a panelist on one of their weekly shows. He's looking for a job. You know, this all goes to show that there's a downside to being liars. The white media flooded the zone with all manner of lies, and it's come back to bite them in the butt. Now, why did they think that they could get away with it? Because they have gotten away with it the other 95% of the time. The white media tells lies every single day, but people don't call them on it. In fact, the people who watch their mind rot will see the white media's lies and then live their lives as if it was true. The white media tells them that they're not seeing what is clearly in front of them. You see Obama ignoring you, the white media says he's not ignoring you. Why, he's reaching out to the black community. And you see Kamala Harris sitting here, sending out surrogates to wag their fingers at you. Oh, no, you're not being insulted. Why? They're just talking directly at you. They're just speaking very directly. They're not being insulting at all. That's what they tried to do. As they see it, they have the ability to invent reality out of whole cloth because people believe most of what they say. So as for white media, feels like they can conjure magic. They know that they're lying, but they also know that both the public and the politicians treat their lies as true. The white media peddles poison, no different than some degenerate meth dealer, and just like a drug dealer, the worst thing that you can do is get high off your own supply. They committed the cardinal sin that no pathological liar can afford to commit. They bought into their own lies, telling themselves that Tim Walz was some sort of inspired choice, that Kamala Harris's poll ratings were only going up. But none of it was true, though you couldn't tell them that. In fact, you couldn't tell the white media anything. These people have conditioned themselves to not listen. They've conditioned themselves to think they know it all, and in the end, they've shown everyone exactly how much they do know. Nothing. These days, the Washington Post has adopted a motto, democracy dies in darkness. Given the way the Washington Post handles their reporting, that sounds more like a mission statement than anything else. Their goal is to conceal the facts, cover up the evidence, and deceive the public so that democracy dies in darkness. Now, let's not go too far with this, though. This is not going to be the end of either CNN or MSNBC. They still have enough viewers where if their parent companies scale them down and get some of the more expensive people on the payroll, or just go ahead and dump all the black ones, as far as they're concerned, that's pretty much the same. If they just go ahead and sharpen their pencils and make a lot of cuts, they can make those things financially viable. Sure, they'll have less viewers, but they'll also cost less money too. Let them become like headline news or something. Let CNN be the new version of that. It wouldn't matter, right? As for the ragged remnants of the fools who were on air trying to invent a mirage of a Kamala Harris election victory, well, now they can dust off all their old talking points from the first Trump administration. Then again, they never actually stopped using them. In fact, after Trump was out of office, that's when they began becoming more shrill and extreme and apocalyptic with their rhetoric. They didn't start talking about that Trump's going to usher in a Fourth Reich stuff until after he was out of office. So expect to see these fools once again trying to brand themselves as some sort of quote-unquote resistance. They're sure to resume giving the same old song and dance, but what they don't realize is there's been enough voters who have seen this show already, and they don't want to see a repeat of it. They understand that it's not Trump that these white media leftists are trying to resist, but rather reality. Though as I've always told you, reality always gets the last word. So they've got their ratings in a nosedive. They've also got talent, quote unquote, if they can be called that, like Chris Wallace, who's already abandoned ship. He didn't even bother to wait to get pushed. He decided to just go ahead and jump. This is what's happening now. Their little flagship networks are on fire and threatening to sink. Ridiculous. This is the white media talking about how they want to save democracy when they can't even save themselves. Like I've always told you, if you're not watching the black media, you'll always be the last to know when you're going out of business. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. LB, Matthew Liggins, Onan X, Jimmy Whitfield, and Samuel Divers. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.